Right, I think we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, but thank you all for joining us. I'm Dr. Tom Cameron. I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you tonight. And what we're going to do is talk about non-synthetic feeding, and what that means is feeding nutrients from food. It's always best to get your nutrients from food. That's been a practice mantra of mine for over 30 years. And we want to talk more about that as we go. We're here, Nature's Logic is introducing a new food, Nature's Logic distinction, but they have fresh meat as a first ingredient, and they're grain-free with a lot of whole food ingredients. And what they've been able to do is they're the only company in the country that has been able to meet all of the recommended daily allowances by using only food. They don't use any synthetic vitamins or isolate minerals. When we talk about synthetics, what that means is made in a lab, so they're not directly from food. And how you could tell if there's something synthetic in a food, if you have a hard time pronouncing it or reading it, it's probably synthetic. So again, I have been in practice since 1982, and very early on in my practice life, I found that I had the best success with sick cases when we looked at nutrition. And so my practice became very heavily involved in what we call therapeutic nutrition, which is finding focused and functional foods that help to bring the patient along closer to healing in a faster way, very often needing to use fewer drugs and other medications. So therapeutic nutrition is something that I have been involved with for a long time, and it's a passion of mine. So, and how I got into therapeutic nutrition was through guinea pigs. I had some clients that had guinea pigs that were not doing well. They were on a national brand guinea pig chow or biscuits, and their hair was dull. Their nails were brittle. They were not very active. The hair was falling out. And so they weren't really very healthy animals. We had them give some fresh vegetables like carrots or carrot greens or other greens, and they got better. But interestingly, in the springtime, when they took them outside and made a pen on this piece of grass that they could forage on, all of their symptoms went away. So what that means is they got some variety and some nutrients that they were not getting in this supposed 100% complete and balanced diet that was made, by a commercial company. And that led me to looking into that type of therapy for other animals, and every case of mine had a nutritional component that we looked to address. And it's critically important that animals get variety and fresh food in their diet to be sure that they're getting what they need. And what we're going to talk about tonight specifically is vitamins. So vitamins from foods are much more valuable than vitamins from being made in a lab that are synthetic. And let's look at that a little closer. So all of us know that carrots are healthy, and there are a lot of good things in there. If you were asked how many nutrients might there be, you might come up with a handful, something like these listed here. But I want to show you a list of nutrients that have been found in a carrot, and these are just the ones that have been found so far. They continue to find new ones every year as the machinery gets better. So sorry, I went a little fast. So this is the first page of nutrients that are in a carrot. Here's the second page of nutrients in a carrot. And here's the third page. So that's a lot of nutrients in one food. And so these nutrients in food are specifically put together to work together and they help each other, and they work better when they're all together in this food matrix or this food combination than if you take any one of these out of the, isolate them, pull them from the carrot, or make them by themselves. And then they don't have all these brother and sister nutrients that are in the carrot all the time. So it's always better to get the whole food. There's much more. It's kind of like that whole thing. They'd rather have you eat an orange than take a vitamin B pill, a vitamin C pill, and a fiber pill. It's not gonna match the orange. Synthetics are not necessarily bad, but they are incomplete. Okay, so the list of nutrients up here, calcium, beta carotene, ascorbic acid, copper, iron, magnesium, are actually a list from a best-selling daily multivitamin that claims it meets all the RDA's recommended daily allowances for nutrients. And you can see that they've been, when I say that synthetic nutrients are incomplete, because all these nutrients are present in a carrot, and we can take them out of the food mix and put them in a supplement, but it's not going to work the same way. So again, it's always best to get your nutrients from food, and we'll talk more about that. Now, vitamins are not just one thing. Most of you are familiar with vitamin C. Synthetic vitamin C is ascorbic acid. And it turns out ascorbic acid does a lot of good things. It can help with infections. It can help reduce fevers. It can help with the structural integrity of connective tissue and vessels, and can help with the health of the skin. So there are things that ascorbic acid by itself does. But it turns out that ascorbic acid is only part of the vitamin C complex. And as you see this list here, other things are involved and part of whole vitamins from food. So there are minerals and trace elements, enzymes, coenzymes, amino acids, fatty acids. And again, there are factors we still don't know that are beneficial to us, that are valuable in the food. And very important. So vitamins are more than just a single part of it. Here's a kind of an architectural drawing of vitamin C. And you can see that the ascorbic acid is a shell around the inner workings of the vitamin C molecule. So it's really considered to be a protective antioxidant shell around the vitamin C complex in food. And we've got a number of other factors in the whole food vitamin C. So J factors help the blood carry more oxygen. K factors help the blood clot. P factors help with the structural integrity of vessels and try to keep vessels in the best health they can. Tyrosinase is organic copper, and that has a whole lot of roles in many metabolic reactions in the body. And the bioflavonoids and ascorbigen complexes, they are very important for preventing heart disease and cancer. They help improve circulation. They help reduce cholesterol, and they can even provide liver support. So when you look at all of those things, if we leave them out and just take ascorbic acid, we're not getting the full, we're missing all of those benefits. So again, taking vitamins from food gives you much more than something that you can make in a lab. So why is this important? This is important, obviously, because we want our animals to get the most health and the most benefit out of their foods. But there's a downside to synthetic vitamins as well, and they can put a drain on the body. I want to tell you a little story. Imagine that I invited you all to my house and for a buffet, and you said you're going to bring lasagna. So you come to my house and you have a bag full of noodles, and that's it. Now, noodles are an important part of lasagna, but they're not lasagna. So in order for that to be lasagna, you have to go into my cupboards and you have to get tomato sauce and meat and cheese and spices, and you have to get some of my pots and pans, mix this all together, put it together, turn on the stove, and then bake it. Then we have lasagna. So we can have a wonderful product. But what happens is there's a net loss to my house. I've lost, you've taken resources that I had in my cupboards. You've used up my electricity. You've made a mess in my kitchen. You've used my pots and pans. So I'm being facetious here, but the bottom line is there's a net loss to my house. Now, when you look at that architectural drawing of vitamin C, if we just give ascorbic acid, the ascorbic acid molecule will go around the body and try to pick up those nutrients that were present in the whole food vitamin but aren't present in just ascorbic acid. So this is especially important when we take synthetic vitamins long term, is that they can actually deplete the body more so than help the body. So again, ascorbic acid is not a poison. It's something that has beneficial effects, although if you take too much of it, it can cause DNA damage. So we've got to be a little careful about that. But it's something that synthetic vitamins are incomplete. So by getting all of your as many nutrients as you can from a whole food, you're going to really just bring the best health benefits to your animals. And there are even studies that have shown, they did a study down in Purdue, and they just had research kennel dogs that they added any type of vegetable to their food 3 times a week. And it turned out that reduced the risk of a certain type of bladder cancer almost 90%. So that's my approach to any animal in my practice, is that if we can get some kind of fresh food in their diet, it's always going to be beneficial. I went through a period where I was trying to get everybody on raw food and a raw food diet or a lightly cooked diet. But people are busy and it's not always practical. So what we need to do is just have people getting some fresh food in the diet, and there's always a benefit to that. And again, it's always best to get your nutrients from foods. Now, here was a fun case. I was seeing some patients down in New Mexico, and Cody was a standard schnauzer who was purchased by his owners to hike in the mountains. And here he's about 13 months old in this picture. And at about 7 or 8 months of age, he started having lameness issues where after 20 minutes to a half hour of hiking in the mountains, he would have to be carried home, which is not really part of the owner's hiking plan. And so they took him to a specialist. They x-rayed his joints and found that he had elbow dysplasia in both elbows. And they were recommending surgical correction of the elbows. Elbow dysplasia is where the bones don't form well and the ligaments and tendons are very loose and wobbly. And so there's a lot of excess motion in the joint that creates inflammation, will eventually cause arthritic change and the joint to break down. So they were recommending surgery. It was more money than the owners could afford. And so they contacted me to ask about, is there anything therapeutic nutrition wise that we can do with this dog? So what we did is we cleaned up his diet a bit, got some fresh food in his diet, and we put him on whole food supplements. And one of them was a cold processed bone meal. And it's always good to wild dogs eat a lot of bones and gristle and things like that. And so bone meal provides all of the building blocks for bones, ligaments, tendons, teeth, skin, and all the connective tissue. So these are help the body to put down a strong skeleton. We also went with some whole food supplements with minerals that helped with ligament integrity as well. Now, I don't know about New Jersey, but in Wisconsin, not all patients do exactly what we ask them to do, or clients don't necessarily do what we ask them to do. Whenever I do a nutritional protocol, I ask that they go on the protocol for 12 weeks or 3 months, and then come back for a reevaluation to where we can change things or just evaluate how we're doing. Well, this owner did not get back with me. And so I was back in New Mexico 6 months later, and I happened to run into these owners, and I asked how Cody was doing, and they said he's doing great. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, we walk about 6 miles in the mountains every day, and he runs about 9 or 10 miles. And they brought him in. I had a chance to evaluate him, and he was just a jock. You could tell he ran as much as he did every day, and his elbows were just tight, strong, and fully functional. We re-X-rayed the elbows, and there was no evidence of elbow dysplasia at all, which I had, to my thinking or experience, I had never seen that before. If you remember, I said he was 13 months old when I first saw him. Now, dogs' skeletons grow for up to 2 years, and so their long bones and growth plates don't close until that time. So we were lucky that we got to this early, where putting good nutrients into his body gave the building blocks to build strong tendons and strong ligaments, and actually the bones improved and pulled together. So he now is an athlete and doing very well. So so that was a fun case, and again, it's one that food was able to give the body what it needed to correct some abnormalities. Now, so if you remember nothing else from this talk tonight, I'd like you to remember that it's always best to get vitamins from food. So to get yours and your pets vitamins from food. Now, again, the Nature's Logic distinction line is why I'm here, is because Nature's Logic, with all their food lines, they have a number of food lines, is the only company that has been able to meet all of AAFCO. AAFCO is the American Animal Feed Control organization, and they set recommendations for the recommended daily amounts of certain nutrients, and most foods use synthetic vitamins and isolate minerals, where Nature's Logic has been able to meet or exceed all of these daily allowances by using only food ingredients. One thing I forgot to say is that in the AAFCO regulations, there are about 50 nutrients that are required to be on a label of pet food. There are studies that have shown that there are over 8,000 phytonutrients. Those are nutrients from plants alone in whole foods, and there are more in meats. Different types of micronutrients in different types of foods. And so when I say that synthetic vitamins and synthetic nutrients are incomplete, that's a good indication, and 50 is a lot less than 8,000, and I would venture to say that there are many more than 8,000. We just haven't found them all. So, so again, I don't even think it's in the same ballpark when you look at synthetics versus food-based nutrients. And in the questionnaires we had earlier, our dogs, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, I would call them adaptable carnivores, because they've been able to adapt to feeding higher amounts of grains and synthetics and things like that. I can't say they're thriving, but they have adapted some. So we always find that dogs go back to a greater stage of health when we get some whole food in their diet. Now, I was asked to talk about a safe way to transition to either like distinction or any food. And in my practice, the way I did this is as we're listed here, is be conservative, okay? Don't be in a hurry. In animals that don't have health problems, don't have sensitive stomachs or known sensitivities to any foods, you can allow 1 to 2 weeks to change over. So for the first 3 to 5 days, say you feed a cup per meal, okay? What I would do is feed 3/4 of a cup of the old food or the current food, and then 1/4 cup of the new food, okay? And do that for 3 to 5 days. And then at the end of that period, you'd change it to half and half of the old food, half of the new food. The next 3 days, 3 to 4 days, you would go 3/4 of the new food and 1/4 of the current food, and then by day 15, you would be on a full new food combination. Now, at any time, we just recently had a case where somebody gave a new food to their pets, and they developed some bloody diarrhea. And we want to watch for any signs of any kind of digestive discomfort and stop if there's any sign of that. So vomiting, diarrhea, gas, loss of appetite, loss of energy, things like that. So stop the new food immediately and go back to, very often we'll feed a bland diet for a few days if there's actual upset of vomiting and diarrhea, but go back to the current food, the old food, and wait 5, 7, 14 days, as long as it takes for the symptoms to completely go away, to their feeling good. And we can reintroduce the food I would go at half the speed that we did on that first slide. So I do 1/8 on the first 3 days, is do 1/8 of a cup and 7/8 of a cup of the old food, and 1/8 of a cup of the new food, and do it that way. And you can, with each new combination, you can go maybe 5 to 7 days. And again, if there's any kind of upset, there could be an ingredient in the new food that is not agreeing with your pet, that they're sensitive to, they could have an allergy to, and they're so anyway, this owner who contacted us recently kept feeding the food, and the animal kept having problems with it. So the first question is why would you keep feeding a food that's making your animal sick? So just be careful whenever we're changing the bugs in the gut. The microflora in the gut have to adapt to new food and new ingredients to digest. So we want to just give them a chance to do that. All right. So if you remember, this is the mantra for tonight. It's always best to get your vitamins from food, and much healthier than getting vitamins from synthetic ingredients. And so I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure to be here. I hope some of the information was valuable to you. And we're going to go back to Greg now, and we're going to answer some questions.
Sounds great. Thank you, Dr. Cameron. Are you able to hear me now?
I am, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So I just want to revisit the first poll question we started with. I know we talked about what are the key ingredients most essential in a dog's diet, and in a majority, I believe 100% of our participants selected protein over minerals, fats, and oils, and carbohydrates. How do you feel about that answer?
I think you've got a very intelligent audience. My answer would be all of the above, okay? And as I was talking about whole foods the whole night, obviously I would not, I think that protein is probably the most important for carnivores because that's the basis of so much of their nutrition. But again, balance is such an important word to me. But they got the answer right. Protein. These are high protein diets that these animals eat naturally in the wild, and they thrive on them and continue to do well today. And that's how most of the formulations are based, with higher protein to match a wild diet or a carnivore diet. So protein is the right answer.
So I know you kind of touched a little bit on the second poll question when we asked the audience what kind of eaters are dogs. So 40% of the audience believes that dogs are omnivores and 55% believe that they're carnivores. And you had mentioned that they were kind of adaptable. So you want to explain that a little bit further?
Sure. Where they got the correct answer, and of course this is always under debate, but the answer I would give is that dogs are carnivores, and this is based more on the shape of their teeth. Their teeth are very much ripping and tearing type of teeth, so they're very well adapted to our carnivorous diet. Now, with domestication of the dog, they have moved into eating more non-meat foods, and so animals have adapted to eat these. And there was a study done a few years ago that the dogs' genetics actually changed to where they can thrive on a higher carbohydrate diet. A wild diet is very low in carbohydrates, much lower than we tend to feed with most of our prepared foods. And this study is one that we have, I think dogs have adapted and changed some to handle more carbohydrates in their diet. I really question the idea that that dogs are thriving on higher carbohydrate diets when you look at the incidence of disease that has gone up over the past 30 years with diabetes and obesity and cancers and so many chronic diseases. And I think it's directly related to diets with higher carbohydrate amounts. So again, I think dogs have adapted and can adapt to eating different types of foods. I just don't think they do as well as they can when we introduce some of those the carbohydrates, and especially carbohydrates. I think like even for us, that's some of the biggest detriments to our health.
Okay. So we're going to switch gears here with the first audience question here. It says, Diana from Huntington Beach, California wants to know, she said, my cat used to eat raw food, but now is eating dry. Can I go back to raw, and how?
Okay, well, first of all, I would highly recommend that cats always eat a diet either of fresh food or canned food. Cats evolved as desert animals, and so they don't drink as readily as dogs do, and so they got most of their water from their prey, of what they caught. So it's always best for cats to have wet food because they need to get a fair amount of their daily water from their food. How you would transition that from dry over to the wet is just like we talked about on changing over foods, is say your cat gets a half a cup of food well, that's probably a lot. Let's just for simplicity, let's say a cup. Let's go with a cup. You would take 3/4 of the old food, of the dry food, and 1/4 cup of the wet food, and then feed that for your and again, if they got a half a cup, you'd have to just split that in half. So you feed 1/4 of new, 3/4 of old in the first meal. Now, there are people who feel that raw food and dry food should not be fed together. That has not, to my mind, that has not been fully proven, but you can feed those separately. But anything that reduces the amount of dry food in the cat's diet, I think, is a good thing. So you would want to just do that gradual transition of 1 quarter, 3/4, 1 quarter new, 3/4 old for about 3 to 5 days, and then half and half for 3 to 5 days, and then 3/4 of new, 1 quarter old for another 3 to 5 days, and then switch over to the new food. Now, if you want to do a combination of dry and wet, that's absolutely fine.
Okay. Our next question, Linda wants to know, I love nature's logic, but I've heard people tell me that it's unbalanced, too much calcium and other vitamins and minerals. What is your take on this?
Okay, it's an interesting question, and we're actually doing some work on this right now. We have a research feeding study going on with large breed dogs to look at this. The food AFCO people and the National Research Council people recently reduced the recommended level of calcium in dog food. And this is in response to large breed dogs who have run into health problems of osteomyelitis and bone degeneration, arthritis, and other kinds of bone problems by too fast of growth. And so their theory is that we need to back off on protein and we need to back off on calcium in their foods. Nature's Logic, when that change was made, then that put Nature's Logic over those recommended levels, and they had been at those previous levels for a long time with no problem at all. So the Nature's Logic foods have been tested through feeding trials, and so they've been certified, and those there's a certain amount of time for pet food companies to make the changes to reduce those calcium amounts, and animals or foods that have been tested on that AFCO protocol have some grandfather time to be able to before they change. So what Nature's Logic is doing, and it's one of the few companies that actually does their own feeding trials, is they have an ongoing feeding trial that's going to last a year with these animals, feeding the existing levels of, quote, higher calcium. And so far, the results have been excellent with both groups in the study. So we are disputing the lowered calcium amount, and this feeds into our discussion for tonight, is that we're maintaining that a lot of the mineral problems and bone problems in these animals are because they're getting isolate calcium. It's not calcium directly from bone meal that's mixed in with phosphorus and magnesium and all the other minerals in the body in what we call physiologic balance, just like they occur in the body. So that's where we look at calcium being a valuable mineral in the body. It's actually the one in the highest amount in the body, but by giving calcium by itself, it's not in balance.
Okay, great. Next question. Stephen wants to know, so what do you think about dogs that have major food allergies? Is the only solution a hypoallergenic dog food? Is there another solution?
Well, allergies are some of the toughest things we deal with, and they can have so many different causes. They can be from toxicity in the body. It can be from something in the air, from something in the water, something in the food, something in the environment. There are so many that it can be, and so. Most allergies have some kind of digestive issue where they're not digesting it well. Very often they have leaky gut syndrome where they're absorbing partially digested proteins that the body doesn't deal with well. Now, immediately, yes, I think you need to do if the animal is really suffering, I think you need to try a hypoallergenic diet. But I would be looking at more fresh food. My approach was to go with more fresh food and minimal amounts of actually, I would take them off processed food for a while. Food allergies are very difficult because when you look at a food bag, a bag of pet food, there are probably 30 or 40 ingredients in there. So it's very difficult to pick out the 1, 2, or 3 or 5 ingredients that are what the animal might be sensitive to. So you can put them on either an exclusion diet where you take them off everything and then gradually bring back different food ingredients individually and feed them for a while. And then if they handle that well, you add another one. If they handle that well, you add another one. So very much like when we change over the foods. But I find that, animals in the wild don't tend to have allergies. They just don't. And so fresh food diets have a better chance of getting those animals symptomatic or to deal with their symptoms. I would also be looking very strongly at supporting the gut, seeing if we could get probiotics and get the health of the gut improved, because if that is no longer leaky, very often that's the source of the allergies. So this is something you want to work well with your veterinarian.
Great. That kind of leads into this next question. So Kylie wants to know, what do you think about fermented whole foods?
I think they're fantastic. And fermented products. And this is something we should all be eating, some fermented products ourselves, sauerkrauts and kimchi and other things like that. What fermented products do is when you ferment vegetables, they actually create and produce more vitamins than they originally had, especially B vitamins. And so the acidity of the fermented foods tends to help the stomach to produce the right amount of stomach acid. It also feeds the environment of the small intestine to where the bacteria and all the microbiome in the small intestine have a better environment to grow. And so fermented foods are just amazing. And so it's something like any other, introducing any new food, you'll just need to give very small amounts, mix it in with some other kind of food, and don't, if you plop down a tablespoon of sauerkraut, and there are a lot of animals who wouldn't eat that. So very often that has to be put in with some other food.
Okay. Great. We got a nice simple one here. Why is my dog always so hungry?
Well, the first question I always ask is, what are you feeding him? Okay. And we'd want to look at the carbohydrate amount in the food. Things like sweets, donuts, bread, these are all carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are burned very quickly. They're like kindling in a fire. And so it'd be very hard to heat your house with kindling. You get a very hot fire, but it's gone very quickly. So you have to just keep piling that on. Whereas if you can do kindling and get things started and put a big oak log or two on the fire, what's going to happen? It's going to burn long and slow and give much more sustained heat. That's what fat and protein do. And so I would want to look at the carbohydrate amount in the dog's food, and because food with more fat and more protein is more satisfying. If you haven't had a stool sample checked, you'd want to be sure that we're checking the dog for parasites, because animals who have worms, intestinal worms, are going to lose food to the worms and be more hungry. I would want to know, is the dog overweight, underweight and also stomach acid. If they don't have the right amount of stomach acid, they're not going to digest their protein very well. And high carbohydrates tend to burn out the stomach acid producing cells in the body. So it's a bit of a complicated question, but just for satiety, okay, of feeling like you're full, fat and protein are going to stick with you longer.
Okay, great. So we're getting a lot of questions asking about grain. So the first one I want to ask is, are all Nature's Logic's foods grain-free?
They are grain-free in that millet is their carbohydrate source. So millet is technically a grass, okay? And so yes, they are technically grain-free. They are not carbohydrate-free. There are carbohydrates in the millet, and so I think that if you feeding dry food is a big practice in this country, and is going to be. But I think it's critically important to look at reducing the amount of dry food in the diet and incorporating either some canned or fresh food in the diet. So anything that reduces the amount of dry food in the diet is going to reduce the carbohydrate issue. And so even grain-free foods can have a lot of carbohydrates. That's when you look at pea protein and tapioca and sweet potatoes and white potatoes. Those are all fairly high carbohydrate foods. And so we always want to look at the amount of carbohydrate in the diet.
Okay, great. So Denise asks, how is Nature's Logic's Kibble holding its whole food nutrition value? I read that Kibble has everything cooked out.
That's a good question. It's an excellent question. And there's, like I talked with the guinea pigs, feeding them guinea pig chow, that's a baked product, okay? And feeding them vegetables that had been cleaned and in the store and things like that, there were less nutrients in that than there were in the grass outside. So any step that we take to cut or process or heat food is going to result in reduced nutrients in the food. So you're correct there. There's a range within the industry that foods can be produced anywhere from, say, the low 200s or 250 up to over 500 degrees. Nature's Logic is on the low end of that. So the dry food from Nature's Logic is cooked at a lower temperature, but there's no question that there are nutrients lost in the food when it's cooked at a higher temperature. And so that's why I prefer that animals are not maintained solely on dry food. Okay, I find that would be like you eating processed food like TV dinners and the like all the time. And I think your body would really be crying out for some fresh greens and fresh meat and things like that. So Nature's Logic makes dry food, but dry food is on the bottom of my list as far as foods that I want to make up the diet. So they can be part of it, but I don't like it to be the full diet.
All right, next question. Any special consideration for geriatric dogs?
Well, absolutely. I don't go to senior diets on senior dogs because, if anything, their digestive tracts become a little less efficient as we get older, as they get older, and so reducing protein even further is an issue. There's research. There's debate right now that older animals or animals with kidney disease or liver disease or other chronic disease need to go on a lower protein diet. And there are challenges to that. And there are a lot of the holistic side veterinarians are not reducing protein because we see different things like weight loss and immune compromise, things like that in older animals. Older animals in the wild don't go on senior diets. So we tend to maintain or go to more medium protein amounts with older animals. So that's a big one. I like to be sure they get plenty of wet food because older people and older animals their thirst response tends to decrease, so they don't drink as much as they should. So it's like a car running a quart low on oil. So by putting more water in their food, it's a way to get more water in them on a daily basis.
So that leads into the next question. Jason wants to know, is it recommended to add water to kibble?
I recommend that, yes. I recommend that for a number of reasons. They found that, number one, it just softens the food, makes it a little easier to digest for the animal. It also gets more water in them total for the day. But they found that when you eat kibble, it's whole food has about 80% water in it, okay? Kibble has about 10 to 15% water. So that's like eating beef jerky or a sweet tart or something like that. And what it does, like a sponge, it's an astringent or can be a bit of an irritant in the stomach until the body has to produce enough water to soften that food. And so long term, that can create inflammation in the GI tract. And also, if we don't add water to it, the body has to produce enough water for that food to soften. So, so I think that adding water to dry food is, I've been recommending that for a long time. The big thing is not to leave it out. You've got to get your animals to where they either put out what they will eat or pick it up, because obviously in the warm weather and people in warmer climates, it can attract anything, flies and other critters. So you don't have with fresh food, you don't have the luxury of leaving it out all day like you can dry food.
Next question. My vet says, and there's more than one question similar to this, as I thought was important to cover. My vet says that grain-free diets can be bad. What is Nature's Logic response to this statement?
Well, what happened when the grain-free food idea came, what they did, they replaced the common grains in food, which is corn, wheat, and soy, and they replaced them with non-gluten grains or non-gluten materials. Those tended to be sweet potatoes, white potatoes, peas, lentils, pea protein, tapioca. So these are all mainly from legumes. So legumes are all those things I just mentioned, peas and lentils. And initially they would put maybe one of those in the grain-free food, but as the grain-free food craze really caught on, pet food companies found it to be very profitable. They added more legumes and more of these non-gluten materials because it was cheap and it was easy. And so what they did was replace larger amounts of meat protein with plant protein. So when the whole, and if you know, 2 years ago, they came up with that dogs were developing a heart disease called dilated cardiomyopathy, and they initially said that it was due to these grain-free foods with all the legumes in them. Legumes, if they're not properly processed, can tie up some nutrients that are very important to heart health. That is something that is, and so they were recommending getting back on grain-based foods, which have their own set of problems. So that whole issue has not been decided yet, and it's going to take some research to absolutely know. But Nature's Logic stayed away from any of the legumes, so they do not use legumes. But some of the grain-free diets, again, they replace plant protein, they replace meat protein with plant protein, and so that can be an issue.
Nicole is a veterinarian technician, and she states, I'm constantly seeing kidney and heart problems in my feline patients. How does non-synthetic feeding factor into preventing these problems?
Okay. Well, I think that one of the biggest reasons we see these problems in in cats is the excess feeding of dry food. Okay, for all the reasons that we talked about before, because kidney disease is the most common disease in cats, and cardiomyopathy in cats is also a big problem. And grain-free foods in cats are no different. Cat foods need higher levels of protein, but plant protein does not work the same as meat protein in the diets. And so I feel that carbohydrates are a big issue. Cats virtually don't eat carbohydrates in the wild, and the dry food is a big deal. So so those are my ideas. I don't think anybody knows for sure why we're seeing so much of it, but boy, we sure are. And I was trained that all disease starts in the gut, and I still believe that. And so I think diets are huge in dogs and cats.
All right. So Carol asked a question: how does Distinction line compare to your existing line of Kibble? I am currently feeding my Samoyeds your beef protein food. Why would I consider switching to Distinction?
Well, the biggest difference, and I would put you in touch with Bob Romig and Claudia and at the pet stores, because they can give you more of this information. The Distinction line has fresh meat as the first ingredient, and that's the most distinct difference with that new food. As the question was asked earlier, I heard that all dry food is bad because it gets processed. The regular Nature's Logic line uses meat meal, meaning that it's meat that has been cooked and dehydrated into a meal. The Distinction line has fresh meat as the top ingredient, and so that's one or two less steps of processing. So more nutrients are going to be maintained and preserved in the Distinction line. And again, it doesn't mean that the regular line is a bad line or unbalanced. They're still all very much balanced, but it's the whole idea of what we've been talking about all night, is that fresh food is better, and you cannot get a dry food that has not been processed pretty highly. Okay, so it can be a good base of a diet or part of a diet, but I don't feel it's really the best food to feed solely. And variety is always important in dogs and cats as well.
Okay, so I just led to 4 people asking, where can I get Distinction line? One customer says it's not available in many places. So I guess where can they find this food?
So my understanding, I mean, I would go to. I mean, you can talk to some of the pet food distributors and pet food stores around you. The website at natureslogic.com also has a retail finder, or they can contact the company, and because on that retail finder, they'll give you put your zip code in, and they'll give you a map of where stores closest to you are. It's also available to be shipped.
Okay, next question. Can you touch on millet, the grain in the dog foods? I don't know much about it.
Okay, millet is again, it's technically a grass. Okay, and so these are seeds from the grass, and millet is it's actually getting much more publicity for a non-grain product. There are several diets that my wife and I have looked into, that millet is allowed as that you can make and have it substitute for rice or other grains like that. But it's grown in third world countries. It grows very well on not such good soil. So there are a number of countries in the world that that use millet as a staple in their diet, and so. So it's something that that is more of a not in this country, but they're growing it more and more. Millet does have there are different types of millet, and in third world countries, they see a lot of goiters. Millet has goitrogens in them, raw millet, and some of them do. And when there's a deficient diet, especially if the diet is deficient in iodine, these are countries where people are starving and don't have a very high plane of nutrition. They will form goiters, and there's been a concern with that. That people have asked. First of all, they're using a species of millet that is called Prosovo millet that is low in any of those types of goitrogens. It's also processed, and it's mixed in with all these other rich food ingredients, and especially they do not have an iodine deficiency. So while that is a potential negative, it's something that that works well in the food, being grain-free and working in the food mix of the Nature's Logic foods.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer wants to know, is there one thing you can recommend for a dog fighting lymphoma currently going through a CHOP protocol?
Oh boy, that's tough. I'm sorry to hear that. One thing, that would be one I would prefer to get a little bit more information from you. I don't know if I have one thing, because we want to support the immune system, we want to support the gut, we want to support the liver, and so there are a number of things that we would want to do. There's a lot of work going on with mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, that have been showing very good results with that. There are other whole food supplements. So if you'd like to contact me, they can get you my email address through Cherrybrook. Be happy to talk more about that with you.
Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for a dog with immune-mediated polyarthritis?
Well, that's another one. So immune-mediated polyarthritis is where the body is attacking the joints and the bone tissue and joint tissue, causing inflammation that results in arthritis. And so this is something that the first thing we always have. The biggest influence on any disease is the diet, because many diets that are high carbohydrates and other characteristics are inflammatory. So they are stressing the immune system, and very often the immune-mediated polyarthritis is due to some kind of hypersensitivity with food. So it's an inflammatory response. That's another one we'd want to. This is something that we need to work with your veterinarian on getting into diets that are non-inflammatory, that heal the gut. Okay, most of the polyarthritises and immune-mediated things have a leaky gut that has either inflammatory bowel disease or leaky gut syndrome, things like that. And so if we can close up the gut, we stop seeding the joints with these little coals that are red hot that are keeping the inflammatory condition going. So that's another one that's it's not a simple answer, but I sure have seen some improvements and marked improvements when we've been able to reduce the things that are causing the problems.
All right, so next question. This probably resonates with the majority of our viewers. Diane wants to know, what do you recommend for dogs that are picky eaters?
Okay, yeah, that's a big challenge, and there we go. I look at what the diet is. If it's all dry food, dogs get many dogs get very tired of that, and to me that supports the idea that dry food can be a bit irritating to the stomach. So they'll look at it very often, they'll walk up to it like they're hungry, and then walk away. And if there's some kind of digestive issue, or they know they're going to feel bad after they eat that food, they'll leave it alone. But if it's going to just sit in their gut and cause inflammation or something like that, that tends to be a problem. And so this is where I would look at starting with small amounts of some raw food and see how well they fix that. Oh, the other is to add, if you're going to continue to feed dry food, that's where adding water. I've seen a lot of animals start eating better when we added water to the dry food. So I might start there, but I would maybe get a small bag or container of some raw food, and or you can start. I also have people start offering fresh food from their cutting board. So cheese, meat, fruits and vegetables. So stay away from raisins and garlic and grapes. Those are and onions. Okay, raisins, garlic, grapes, and onions. Those are the no-nos for dogs, but and chocolate as well. But just start, as you're using your cutting board, start giving fresh pieces of those foods, just to let their digestive systems get a little bit used to eating some fresh food. And then companies like Nature's Logic they have raw food available that you can buy in patties, frozen patties, that you just pull one out and let it thaw overnight, and then just cut in small pieces and give pieces of those. Fresh food is much easier on the digestive tract. So those are ways that I like to work on picky eaters.
Okay. Will whole foods and proper nutrition help a dog that is constantly thirsty with dry skin and a nose?
Okay. So I'm sounding like a broken record, but we want to look at the food, because if they're constantly thirsty, are they eating just dry food? And I mentioned that was 10 to 15% moisture in that food. So it's taking a lot of water from their body in order to soften that, to digest it. Animals that are always thirsty and urinating a lot, we call that polyuria and polydipsia, PUPD. That can be a sign of some kind of internal disease like diabetes or liver or kidney disease. So I certainly would have some a blood work done at your veterinarian, and have a urine sample tested to look for sugar in the urine, or how well the kidneys are working. The fact it has a dull coat, that tells me that's the coat is a mirror from the inside. Okay, or a mirror of what's going on the inside. So either we've got a diet that is not agreeing with us, a digestive system that is not doing a very good job in getting nutrients out of the food, or we don't have enough fat in the diet. Something is out of balance, and so that's something that I would want to look at, all those things. But I think a baseline of working with your veterinarian, of getting a blood sample, is a good thing. Okay. And pet stores like Cherrybrook have wonderful nutritional supplements to look at coats. But I think you need some diagnostics before you just start taking things off the shelf.
Okay. Next question. What would your recommendation be for a 17-year-old cat in the beginning stages of renal failure and vomits frequently, that eats primarily raw and canned food?
Eats primarily raw and canned food. Okay. It's in early renal failure. There are a number of supplements out there that can help support kidney function. and that would be something I would be looking at. Sometimes in older animals, very often the vomiting is due to what we call uremia. When kidneys are not working as well, you can get a backup of waste products in the body, and that one of the first symptoms of that is nausea. And so it can affect how well the digestive tract moves as far as moving food along, but it gets a sourness to the digestive tract to where they just don't, food doesn't digest as well. I used a fair number of nutritional supplements that supported the digestive system, and so if we can get them down this senior cat, that's another one that I would look at. Also, talk with your veterinarian about the hydration of the cat. Very often, if we're experiencing kidney disease, they can be dehydrated, and dehydration can cause some nausea as well. And there are ways that we can give fluids under the skin if they need it. Some animals need them once a week, but it is a progressive disease. So as they get older, they can need fluids more often. But fluids just tend to lubricate the system better. And I think you're on a good food for them because it is a moist food. But those are some things I would look at doing with a senior cat like that.
Okay, next question. How do you recommend mixing fresh food with kibble in terms of like what proportions?
Well, the proportions of what you feed is really, I used to say I want at least a 50-50 mix. Okay, I find that to be the best. And that's also a mixture that people can stay with. It gives them some flexibility because if people get busy, schedules are crazy and unexpected, and things change. And so if you're on a 50-50 mix, they're getting the benefit of this fresh food, but you've got the balanced kibble that if you've got to be gone for a few days and won't be there to give them the fresh food, they can live on that fine. And so then when you get back, you go back to the other to the proportions you were feeding before. So the ideal is for me and in my practice, and what people were able to do most conveniently with modern schedules, was a 50-50 mix. And it, again, I would have you wet the dry food before you feed it, so there's moisture there. There are real debates on whether to mix dry food and wet food and raw food. I am not sure I'm completely convinced on either side of that argument, and so I tend to separate them, just so you know what they're eating, and you can monitor that well. But you put the wetted dry food on one bowl and the raw food on the other, and but that's not the only way to do it. That's my way, but I don't feel it's a super important point.
Okay. So we're running way over time at this point, so this is going to be our last question for the evening. We do want to remind all of our participants, though, that if you did pose a question that Dr. Cameron was unable to answer during the presentation, we will respond to you offline. So for the last question tonight, Nicole wants to know, what are your thoughts on raw goat's milk, for example, soaking in kibble versus water?
I think it's a good option. I wouldn't do it all the time. I like raw goat's milk. I think it's a terrific part of the diet, and it's terrific. I don't do anything all the time, and so if you have access to raw goat's milk, I say go ahead and use it. I just don't like the same food to be given all the time. So just mix it up. Okay, maybe every other day, and there are no hard and fast rules there. But I don't think anybody gets enough water, and so I might go goat's milk 3 times a week and water 4 times a week, just to say I'm getting more water. So that's a personal preference there, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, other than I feel the wrong answer would be to give goat's milk all the time and not give water at least some of the time. So that's my opinion. And we joke about veterinarians. If you ask 5 veterinarians a question, you're going to get 6 different answers. And so you may hear differently from other veterinarians, and I don't disagree with them. It's just that what I've found that's worked for me.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Dr. Cameron, and thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Like we mentioned, if you did pose a question and we were unable to respond to, we will be responding to you offline. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted to Cherrybrook's website in about a day or so, and we'll be sending a link out to everyone who's participated, so that way you can review the presentation again or share it with anyone else who could benefit from this program. So thank you so much, Dr. Cameron. We really appreciate it tonight.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Sounds great. Have a good evening.
Good night.